Awesome. Welcome everybody to Basic Logo Design with Illustrator. So we're going to walk through a few different things today. So this is kind of the short list, but I would say there'll be some different things in between that we'll touch base on and kind of try to give you the most you can out of this session. So if you're a beginner person that's using Illustrator for the first time, and or I guess even other vector programs too, if you come from another vector program, you're trying to understand how Illustrator is different. I'll even kind of maybe hint at a couple of different programs that are free that you could possibly play around with, even if, let's say, you don't have Illustrator and you were just curious and you wanted to try a vector program in the I guess interim until you get maybe Illustrator or you get the Creative Cloud or whatever the case is. But then we'll go through who I am, of course. We'll talk about how you use vector programs or what the uses are, maybe the different types of graphics that come out of them versus Photoshop, which they're kind of like sister, brother, cousin programs. Not even sure how you want to call them, but they're basically very related programs, but they are quite different in what their actual uses are. So then we'll also talk about the top 5 tools, or at least my top 5 tools, a couple that I've added into my top 5, as well as a few tools that I use on a daily. So once we actually get into the program, we'll talk about that. And then after that, we'll hit the actual kind of name of the class. So we're going to actually create a logo. So I actually have something queued up for us to kind of not necessarily follow along with, but how I start from scratch or how I start from a drawing that I actually did on my own. But then we'll do a little bit of Q&A and resources. So kind of a little ending piece just to kind of give you guys a little something extra, which is check out my portfolio, but also different places you can find more tutorials about Illustrator, or at least how I find them too. All right, so let's get started with who is Sam. And we saw me a little bit earlier if you guys started, I guess in the beginning of this, but ultimately here I am on the camera just for a little while, just to kind of give a face to the name. Basically, I'm an artist, a maker, an entrepreneur, started my own business for a few different things. Also an instructor, obviously. But then I used to live in Seattle, Washington, so I basically graduated back in 2012 with a fine arts degree. I learned a lot about Photoshop and Illustrator. Then I also learned about 3D programs and how to animate and do some other different things too. So a lot of versatile digital design skills that I'm sure if you follow the different videos that I make, I'm gonna make a lot of different videos about a lot of different things. And a lot of that stuff is kind of following the education that I had when I was in school. There was a point where I used to work at Microsoft as well. That's where all of my teaching skills kind of came from. There was a particular part of Microsoft that was like, if you ever been to the Microsoft store, kind of like an Apple store, but the Microsoft store. Not that I'm trying to advertise for these people or anything, but basically that was the particular employer that gave me an opportunity to start to actually enhance my teaching skills in a kind of more public setting. So I guess I would say giving them some type of rep that they ultimately did that for me. And then kind of beyond that, I just obviously have a big versatile amount of skill in 2D and 3D design. So a lot of different skill ultimately. So let's actually get started. So basically the basics. And what I mean by the basics is, what is a vector? So to the best of my ability, I won't make this too complicated. I want to actually simplify it. If we look at this graphic, a vector is trying to show you that when you zoom in, it doesn't lose quality, versus a bitmap or maybe a JPEG. You might be familiar more with that, I guess, file type, but a bitmap is kind of the most generic of them all. And when you zoom into a bitmap, it is a finite amount of information. It has dimensions, it has information side of the code that's really talking about the pixels and what colors they are, and they range from white to black and all the colors in between that too. So ultimately there's color code that is within the bitmap that kind of talks about that in a more computer sciencey way to say it. But the vector is more in the program is just using actual lines. It's using paths, it's using shapes, and different ways that they're combined and colored and things like that, adding strokes to them to make vector graphics up. And then when you export them or when you save them out as a picture, then it becomes actually a bitmap. But in the process of creating it, it actually is a different type of graphic, which 2D and 3D programs utilize vectors to be able to create the shapes that they do. So just to kind of take an example, like a look at some examples, this is probably the first one I want everybody to see, just because on the left is a picture of a tiger. And if you look at the details, especially long as I guess your internet's buffering all the way it needs to and it shows as full quality as it can, in the tongue area of the left side picture of the tiger, you can see more detail. And same thing even in the teeth, or even in the nose, or even in the fur in general, like on the patch of fur that's on top of the tiger's nose, like the orange fur there. If you look at those areas and compare it to the other side, you'll see some key differences. It's almost like one was colored with solid colors almost, versus the other one has like some serious gradients in it just because of the natural patterning in things, especially when it comes to fur and different animals like this, where there's a lot of gradation. You could create that level of detail maybe in Illustrator, but usually vector graphics kind of result in a look that's like this, even though this one is a decently high detailed vector graphic. On the right hand side, that's kind of come from the left hand side, but it still has lost in fidelity, but it is like a more stylized look. So I would say when you've ever seen graphics that look like that, it is definitely a vector graphic. So I'm going to pop through a couple different other examples. This one obviously is more fun, more bright. It's definitely just the color choices and things like that. But basically, the way that there's a lot of solid shapes, solid look to the shapes. This is obviously a graphic that's been created, and it's not like a photograph or anything. But the last one was a vector from a photograph, versus this one might have just been created from somebody's imagination or a drawing, and then they converted it into this look. Or this one, which is once again somebody's hand-drawn, probably graphic. They drew something maybe by pencil or pen, and then they scanned it in, and then they embellished it. They added the details. They added that rising sun look to the top of the skull, or maybe there was no hair like on the skull. I didn't just notice that now. Maybe they added the hair after, or that lace look that's behind everything there. All those different details might have been added after, or maybe they drew them in, but they kept them separate elements and gave them a way to you could see that those are different elements they've added together. But Photoshop could maybe produce something like this, but it would be harder to do, big time. It just is not the right tool maybe for doing certain things. Photoshop is definitely more of a manipulation tool when it comes to just the pixels, but not to create the shapes per se. You could paint in Photoshop, like do some like almost digital painting type things, but this is more, I would say, close to, I guess if we were to give this the tool of painting was Photoshop, or I guess it would be more like a Lightroom too, where you develop the image and things like that. Illustrator is more of, I think, you're using certain tools like pens, like almost markers, or like things like that to fill in the color with like similar tools like Photoshop, paint buckets and things like that. But to draw these shapes or to create some of these shapes in a way that they can, and vector does mean almost like infinite scalability. So you can create things that can scale up in a way that's really large. But it is a different type of tool. Sorry, I'm maybe not giving the best explanation on the difference between them, but if you see the way these graphics are looking, they're all more solid shaped, and their shapes are really defined. There's different patterns that are created. within that tool that maybe Photoshop you'd have a harder time doing. But yeah, so these are a few different examples. We're going to create our own example here in a second. So we're going to see a few different types of tools coming up. So the next, I guess, step here in this world of Illustrator is really just explaining some of the tools. We're going to walk around the interface a little bit if you're not as familiar, just to kind of highlight some of the main areas. And then we'll talk about these things. We'll talk about selections. We'll talk about the shape builder and then different shapes as well, like different shapes that you can create and use. We'll talk about the width tool, which is a tool that manipulates. We'll see that in person here in a sec, or through video. And then the pen tool is pretty much, I would say, like your main drawing tool. It can create any shape. It can create straight lines and create curved lines. It can do a lot of different things. The shape builder tool can build up to a shape through other shapes. So there's a lot of different ways to build things up and a lot of ways to get to a conclusion. And then we'll also talk about just how you can colorize things beyond just flat colors. So if we were just to go back to some of these examples and look at, I mean, this one's using a lot of solid colors on this one, but if we were to go back to this one, look at the transition on the nose where the nose curls over here and it gets dark, kind of like goes from yellow to red, and then kind of has that orange bleed in between. The gradient tool is going to be allow us to do stuff like that. Or even at the bottom of the nose, it's got a lot of slight gradients all over. Actually, if you look at it closely, there's not a lot of flat, solid colors really anywhere on this, except for maybe the spots or the way that they overlaid those kind of details. But this is a good example of where the gradient, how the gradient tool would be used, you know, like this particular image. So let's get to it. So just to kind of start off, and I won't be on here the whole time. I just want to bring myself back just for a second, just to remind you what I looked like. No, I'm just kidding. But basically, I'll remove this once it's important. But when we start Illustrator up, usually you're going to start, it might just be a blank area here, but we're going to start new just so I can show you kind of what it looked like to start a new document. So in most cases, you kind of want to be thinking about where your graphic's going to go, how it's going to be used. If it is just I'm a spur of the moment idea, or I'm just trying to make something, maybe those details don't matter and that don't get hung up on that stuff. But in the case of, let's say I did know it was going to go on a piece of paper, or I did know this particular thing was going to go a particular size, always size it maybe first, just so you kind of already know in mind where you're going. So in most cases, depending on the units you're in, inches is probably best if you're dealing with real physical sizes. If you know what it is you're dealing with in the case of the digital world, usually you're dealing with pixels. And then beyond that, inches is, I guess, for America, but a lot of people use the metric system in America too, and I would say it's the easier one to understand, especially when it comes to, when I do a lot of 3D modeling, I use centimeters and millimeters mainly. But inches is good for our paper sizes. We already know those. So if you go under there's paper document profiles, and then I'm actually just selecting letter, and then by default, it gives you it knows the pixels, or it knows the different translations. But if you were to go to inches and see that it says 8.5 inches by 11, these are common things in most programs. So let's just start a new document just to kind of play around here for a little while. So when the new document started, you see your page, you see your paper. Off to the side here, if you're on like a default layout of most Adobe programs, even from the far past to even probably the future, they're all going to be laid out more or less the same. And I'm going to turn my video off now just so we can just see the program. But over here on the right hand side, if you kind of see where my mouse is, this side here is another toolbar versus the left toolbar. Left toolbar is going to be your main kind of, how should I say, probably creation tool. Some of them are for color and things like that too at times. But they're separated, I guess, in a particular way, and it's the same in Photoshop or the same in After Effects or most Adobe programs. They've kind of given you two sides, one being like almost like the properties and adjustments to these tools. Some of these tools, like down here, for example, on this far left at the bottom, is going to be your fill and your stroke. So the inner and outer portion of the shapes. The shapes could have no fill, which looks kind of like this box right here. So when I opened up this palette, and there's a few different ones, the one that we were on was kind of just like just a color palette where you can fade between CMYK, which is the colors in the printer. That's how the printer mixes color. Versus if we were to switch this to this little drop down here, and there's a lot of little menus, I would explore. That's what I'm going to highlight in this first little segment. Explore, explore, explore. If you don't explore the program enough, you're never going to know where things are. So definitely explore. CMKY is the color, I guess, breakdown within a printer. Like if you were to deal with toner or anything like that, you would know that CMKY is the colors that are inside it, or even in your inkjet printer. But RGB are the colors for the monitor. It's like what the monitor sees the colors as. So depending on what your output is, whether it's for the screen, for the computer, or for, excuse me, not for the computer, but for the real world, you're going to deal with those colors respectively. We're not going to harp too much on that. Just know that those are what it is. If you haven't heard about that stuff before, maybe that's your first time hearing it and giving you couple little extra gems. But basically, there's a lot of areas here that are going to manipulate different things. There are times where you'll need to go and change the fill color. So if you double click on it, it gives you a color picker, which is a separate menu from some of the stuff over here, but it ultimately is for the at the moment color that you're dealing with. So let's say we needed red or we needed whatever color, we can switch to that now when we use our tools. The fill, once we complete a solid shape or we draw out a solid shape, which right now I just selected the shape tool over here on the left hand tool set, and if you click on it and hold it with your left mouse click, there's a few other options that show up. So you have the rectangle tool. I just use the ellipse tool, the polygon tool, which is going to allow you to adjust the amount of faces. That if you just simply click, it gives you the amount of sides, and I can adjust it to, let's say I need an octagon. I can click on 8 or type in 8, and then radius. Let's say I need it to be a certain size. I need it to be 0.5 inches wide. There it is. So 1/2 inch wide, octagon. So some of these are going to be the most true basics of the program. You're going to be able to bring out shapes. You're going to use certain shapes to build up other shapes, which I would say this technique is actually a technique that mirrors something in 3D. So like what we're about to go into next. So there are a few different base shapes you can use. If you click on the rounded rectangle tool, you just click on the screen, it's going to give you a radius, a corner radius. So how round is the corner? So let's say we want a 1/2 inch rounded corner. So, and it also keeps the same size you used before, the last parameters you used, and then all you could do, you could just change through them and see kind of what the result looks like at the same size, if that matters. Also, let's say I wanted to change my color. Let's say I started from red, but I wanted to change the color to another color. These are just simple things. So I can just double click back on, excuse me. So the color picker is actually for the tools, but now that I have it created, you actually can click on this color palette up here, and this one will actually change the color now. And I think this one might have done the same thing, to be honest with you. I think they're kind of connected in a certain way. So depending on what you're doing, some of these might be the same thing. You just are going to them based on where you are or what you're trying to do. So yes, selections is another thing. So we're going to jump around a little bit. I think we jumped to the shapes, but we're going to go back a little bit and talk about just selecting in general. So left click when you're on this black arrow at the top, or if you like shortcut keys, some people are good at those things, V on the keyboard is your selection versus A on the keyboard is your direct selection. So direct selection versus your kind of regular or main selection tool. Your main selection tool is going to grab multiple objects. It's also going to grab the one singular object and allow you to move it around as well. The direct selection actually allows you to grab the points. So if we were to zoom in a little bit, so if I hold Alt and middle mouse wheel, I can zoom in. Or over here on your toolbar, you have zoom as well. You also at the bottom of your document here, it actually says 300%. That's where I'm at right now. You actually can just click this little drop down. I guess so if just depending on how close you need to get, if you need to kind of just ease in, whatever it is with the zooming. I like to just use the Alt middle mouse wheel scroll, and then wherever my pointer is pointing, it'll zoom in to that position or that particular area. That's probably the easiest way I can say navigating can be. And then just your wheel is just going to be a vertical movement. And then if you hold Control, that is going to be your horizontal movement. So side to side is Control, Alt, wheel is going to be your zoom in and out, and then your up and down. So that navigation can be very key to allow yourself to move swiftly in and out of a graphic that might be complicated or complex. Some of these little basic things, like I said, they're not even sometimes little. These are like the foundational things that allow you to traverse the program. And not only this one, but in any 2D program. Some of these things are basic. So let's move forward here. Let's actually talk about, oh, and actually, you know what? I didn't even talk about the direct selection. So direct selection allows me to click on the points that you see that show up when you click on direct selection, because if you're on the regular selection, those points, you can see them, but they're not, you can't directly select them. And that's why they gave you that tool. So you could actually grab on and manipulate the shapes. So this is where you can actually get a lot more abstract shapes. You can get shapes that can start to gear you towards a conclusion in your mind. Let's say you actually already had like something in your mind. It was kind of a star, but not a star. And you can move some points around, and next thing you know, you're close to that conclusion. Or whatever you can imagine. Sometimes the points, especially in curved areas like this, will have these handles. So these handles you grab onto, left click, hold and drag, and you can manipulate the curves, the curved shapes, which can lead to some interesting results. You can do some different things. So just kind of going back to the fill and the stroke. Obviously the fill is the red, the stroke is the black. And you can always know you're doing something wrong when something like this happens. Maybe it's not necessarily doing something wrong, but it's more of when the shape's been twisted out of shape in a way that usually you don't want to leave it like this. This usually can result in kind of some confusing things when you're trying to adjust it later. So if you see that something like this has happened, you click on the point, it's almost like untwisting a pretzel or something like that, but you're just moving the shape into a position where it isn't overlapping over itself. The path itself isn't crossing over in a weird way, which results in something like this. So always just know that the handle is doing something like that if that happens. Let's see here. What else do we have on the top 5? Shape Builder. Let's go there. All right. So the Shape Builder is a really cool tool. What I'm going to do is clear this stuff out. Quick way. Grab your main selection tool. Make a marquee or drag a box around everything, and then delete. That's the quickest way. Delete on your keyboard. I would say there's There may be a delete option up here on the interface, but delete on the keyboard is going to be your most common delete in any program, even if there is a button on the screen. All right, so Shape Builder. This one is pretty cool. It allows us to build up kind of complex shapes in a very quick way. So I'm just drawing out quickly and we'll see what we can come up with. Maybe it's logo worthy, maybe it's just abstract and cool looking, who knows. So if you want the ellipse tool to draw a perfect circle, you have to hold shift while you're drawing it out. If you just draw it out without holding shift, it actually draws a, well, in ellipse, like depending on the direction you start to draw. If you're drawing it more horizontally, it's going to draw it wide, or vertically, it's going to draw it tall. So this does look a little confusing at first, but when I flip this, I'm going to turn off the red. I'm going to leave the black stroke, and we're going to see hopefully a cool result here. All right, so this tool relies on you to select everything. Oops, I'm going to move it down a little bit so we can get it more on the middle of the screen here. So select everything, and then on the list here, there is a tool that looks like this. It kind of looks like multiple shapes and then an arrow. I think in newer illustrators, it might even look a little different than that, but this is the same tool. So when you click on it, it actually just hover over things. You can see that it's showing us the intersections of these different shapes and the different kind of wedge pieces and sliver pieces that we're getting as a result of that. So we could look here and maybe see, I actually do see a couple things. One is right here. It's kind of like this 6 looking shape. And I'm gonna find it so by default, it adds things together. So if I drag across, it's gonna combine shapes. If I wanna delete them or take it away, take a chunk away, I can hold Alt. On my cursor, if you're looking where my cursor is, the black arrow, there's a plus when I don't hold down Alt. When I hold down Alt, it's a minus. So when I do that and I click or drag across, it's going to delete things. But I deleted a little too much because I was getting carried away. So now let's undo and do that again. So I want, maybe I want this. So I'll delete this, and I'm holding down Alt, remember that, and then just dragging across, or I can just select as well. So maybe here I want to actually combine all of this together. All of this. I'm going to delete this. And maybe delete, or actually add this stuff together. Oops. I think it did something weird. That. This. Maybe not that. And if you mess up, or let's say you don't want the thing you just did, you can always push Control Z. Control Z is going to always be your best friend. Let's say we don't even want any of this other stuff. So I'm just going to drag a quick line through that. And let's say I kind of maybe see something in this. Maybe I'll open this up. And maybe here, delete that. Maybe I'll delete this up. Or I guess I'll just combine this right here. And it is kind of abstract right now. Let's say this is the way we wanted it though for now. Then I could go in and actually color these things in as well, these different areas. So I guess the quick way, there is 2 tools. One is not on the list, and this is the kind of thing I was talking about. It might be a little in between. The normal way is really just click on the color palette, go in, find the color. And you can do that for every area that's a solid area. And I could even just go in here in the color picker and just quickly jump in and find the colors that I want. let's say I like that blue color at the top. I can use the dropper on the side here. So there's an eyedropper in most Adobe tools. This particular one just allows you to pick an object that you see, and it'll adjust and copy the settings. So this eyedropper tool down here, kind of more about a little bit beyond halfway on the list. I can drop on here, it'll copy that color. So now we can fill in this logo or whatever we want to call this in a particular way. So if so here I see that we don't have a closed shape. So the reason why I could tell is because it colored. Oh, there's a piece on top. And maybe we don't want that piece. Let's delete it. Alrighty. Oh, I see what was going on there. Sometimes that shape can leave some artifacts, if you will, like some shapes that are left over or incomplete shapes, or stacked it on top for whatever reason, and maybe I just didn't go through and delete it properly. But that's kind of what we were seeing there, and maybe we get some, I guess, some more inspiration from kind of what's happening here. Might even use this piece as a way to create more for the logo. Who knows? I think I might do that. Just use that piece down here. Little happy accident that happened right there. So the shape builder tool, and I'm like going a little bit beyond where I wanted to on that, but the shape builder tool actually allows you to do some pretty fun stuff when it comes to quickly just mashing up a bunch of shapes. If you kind of know the way you want your shapes to work, you can kind of compose a rough thing and then find within that maybe something that works for a logo. With this, I might switch this to like a solid color. And then maybe this last piece, I would use the dropper here. And maybe that's a rough start to it, but ultimately you could put some words there and start to go forward with that. Or maybe that's for, it could be for anything. I really can't tell you. The word logos can be used. They can be used for a lot of different things. If I were just to jump over quickly, just to the pause between the top 5, here's actually the beginning video that we saw before we got started. These are the pieces of it. And I actually made these, if we camera really quick, I drew these from scratch, like at first, like on paper. Oh, where's my camera? There it is. So yeah, I drew these from scratch, and then I ended up, I think I ended up tracing them or doing something to revise the drawing. But I draw a lot of things from scratch first before I get started in Illustrator. So in most cases, it won't be this random unless you're just trying to do some free form type of logo design. It won't look like this in most cases. It will look more structured, I would say, just because you already created that structure, if that's what you're after. Some people like to go from blank. Some people they like the recipe. Like, it just depends on what you do. So let's see what else we have on the top 5.
Chat, Alex is asking, is there a freestyle tool for drawing?
It is. There is, and we'll get to that. There totally is. Did you say, was there a freestyle tool? Is there a free tool, not a paid tool? Was that what I thought I heard?
Freestyle, like.
Oh, freestyle tool. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
For drawing, you can share at the end too. You don't have to.
Oh no, we can do it right now. That's okay. Let's do it.
Thank you.
So basically, while we're on the drawing types of tools, that's kind of what we're highlighting anyway. So that's a good call out. So let's put this to the side and let's go over here on the rest of the list. So one of the freestyle tools, I guess, that you could use is the pen tool, but there is one that's more free than that. And I just not just really stumbled upon it, but I don't use it often. But there is a tool called the Blob Brush. And it basically allows you, oops, sorry, let me switch over to the program. Huh. My bad. All right, so it allows you to draw, and it's on the list here. Let me back up a little bit just because I wasn't on the screen. So I'm gonna say maybe about less than 10 down on the list is a tool called the Blob Draw. And it allows you just to kind of freehand draw in a shape. And it does even have some, I guess, smoothing tools that are built into it, which accessing those tools usually is at the top when you're on the tool. So maybe you don't have too much control. But when you draw in with this tool, and actually I think it's smart enough to know it can combine a previous shape or object to the new drawing or the new piece that you draw. So this tool actually can do some, I guess, some like really cool patterning for you pretty quickly. Like henna or something like that as we keep drawing it. But if you have, let's say, a stylus or like a digital stylus that you can use as a simulated pencil or something like that on your computer, then you'll have more control over that, obviously, unless you just have a really good hand mouse control, which I'm using my right hand, I guess, for this. If you have a more dominant hand, maybe you can be a bit stronger, but the stylus actually is, I guess, really just a way for designing with graphic tools like this. But this particular tool, I guess where its strength is that if we look at the object after we've drawn all those little loops, they're all connected. They're all one solid shape. So that's a really nice thing about that tool, is that it combines it automatically for you. Though it looks like in this version of of Illustrator, it may be a bit more limited than a newer version. I really can't say. I'm on, this is CS5 is what I'm using right now, but the Creative Cloud's version is, I'm sure, is updating different tools all the time. There's also a pencil tool. The pencil tool allows you to draw a freehand line, a singular line, versus that blob tool was more like a marker stroke. So if the marker stroke actually had two lines to it to kind of create the shape, this one just a singular stroke, singular line. So if I were to add a stroke to this, versus adding a stroke to this, and we're gonna have to change the color of the stroke so we can see it. But let's say I added a stroke to this, I'm gonna add a bright color. What we're really seeing is that the stroke is going around the edges of the graphic. And if this one already was a closed shape on the black area, it actually had two lines, kind of a line to kind of show this inner area and a line to go around the outside. That's why we see the stroke like this, versus this stroke was just a single path. Hopefully that makes sense. And then the reason why we only see the stroke, even if I were to change the color, it would just be one solid color, not like a black and another color. Because the fill is the black on this one, versus there is no fill on this single line. So if we drop down and go to Smooth Tool, I think that might be adjusting. Oh, I see. You draw on the actual stroke itself and it adjusts it and makes it more smooth. Really don't use some of these tools. I don't do too much freehand drawing, but geez, just doing my own tutorial might incentivize me to do more. Who knows? Excuse me. And then the path eraser tool, this one seems to be pretty obvious where it's going to break down a path. Though these are not the main top tools, these are just some of the other ones. The pen tool will be kind of one of our top tier tools that if you learn that one, you'll be able to draw any shape you really want and really control the shape exactly to the way that maybe you drew something or you're tracing over a pre-existing picture or whatever. So let's talk about the pen tool. And I know we're already cranking through this hour pretty quick, so we're going to get through this and then we're going to start talking about some other stuff. So what I'm going to do, I jumped out of that document and I went into another that I already started, which has a drawing that I drew actually earlier today. I kind of just freestyled a quick little graphic just to play around with some of these tools. So And we already showed some of the main ones. If we were just to jump back real quick, the width tool, the pen tool, and the gradient tool are what we have left. We're going to show most of those all together in this one last example here. And then we'll go to making a logo really quickly too. This could even be a logo if you wanted it to, or that example I showed before. It just depends on what your logo is supposed to look like, what it's supposed to be for. This one, let's say you own a flower shop. It's called Marigolds. And this is the logo that you roughed out and you want to bring it into Illustrator. So how that would work, first thing I did is I scanned in my graphic and then I opened it, and I'll show that full process in the next sample. But let's say we're already on this step, and I'll show them that part on the next one. But let's say we're already on this step and we just need to start tracing some shapes. So we have a couple different ways we can go about it. We could have used the I guess the shape maker tool and started to create some shapes. So for example, I could bust out, let's say the polygon. I'm gonna change 3 sides. And I want to basically kind of highlight the areas that are more triangular. So on the graphic, hopefully everybody can see that. I know it's a little faint, but should be still visible. This is just one way to achieve probably the same thing in a few different ways. This is one way. So what I'm doing is copying and pasting a few of these same size triangles and lining them up with the top of this marigold shape before the petals, but the stem area that holds the petals in. And I need a shape that kind of comes and swoops around like this. So I'm probably going to use an ellipse. Start off, hold shift, and then I will position this into place. And then now I want maybe, I might even just use a straight up rectangle here and go around this, maybe to the edge, or actually maybe, we'll see how this works out. This might not be the exact placement I want, but we'll do that. And then now let's actually save the pen tool for some of these other parts of this. But let's use the shape builder tool again, just so we can see that in action one more time. This is a little bit simpler than I think the last thing I was showing. It was more abstract, the other one. But now I'm just deleting the pieces I don't need, the pieces that don't help me define the shape. So all this internal stuff, whoops, deleted a little too much there. Or actually, I guess the better way to do this is just combining instead of, what I was doing was holding Alt and deleting, but I should have just been combining like in this area here. Sure, that could work. And then now we can maybe create this area or the top area. So the pen tool is what I'm going to highlight next. So that's going to be our kind of bread and butter tool. Maybe this might even be, I mean, at the timing that we have right now, maybe this might be the logo. And then I'll show you how to do a few things with this graphic once we finish this up. So I did see actually, you know what? This, I'll use the pen tool, but I'll use a secondary tool to fluff the lines up, if you will. So the pen tool is like a pen that you can really control. So I could draw straight lines, or I could draw curved lines as well, all in the same tool. So what we want to do with this though, and it's going to make it really simple, is use the pen tool to draw just one stroke on all of these, and then there's a tool called the width tool that allows me to widen them up. So let's go through the pen tool exercise first. So it's either P for pen, or it's this pen that kind of looks like a quill, like an old school ink pen. So when you draw out your points, if you just click, you click and hold and you drag, and it creates the curved point. Your first point is just going to be a single click, and then your next point would be your curved line that comes from that. The 2 points connect and create the line. So let's keep going through this. And then let's do this next one. And what I'm doing is just finishing it. You can either push V, or you can click on the selection tool button on the toolbar as well. So the least amount of points, the better you want to use here to articulate any shape in general. All right, we're almost there. Trying to keep an eye on the time too, so we can leave some time for questions and such. But I think I'll be able to make it happen. And actually, you know what? Instead of leaving the bottom, I actually kind of have an idea on where this can go. So we should be able to wrap this up decently quick. All right. So pen tool, and then now I'll use the tool that kind of looks like a bow and arrow on here. It's called the width tool. So the width tool allows you to widen things up. So let's widen all of these up very quickly. Whoops. So, and it works on a stroke particularly. So it is an interesting tool because it's like real specific to a particular aspect of a shape. And then you can add more points and nodes and tighten things up. So you can make kind of like leaf shapes and different things like that with this tool. It's pretty handy, pretty clever. So basically I'm just clicking on the line, dragging, it makes it wider. And then I'm adding more points by just clicking on that same path and doing something like that. So what I'm gonna do quick here is switch this to be a solid shape. So switch the path for the stroke. So there's a little switch arrow here to make it solid. And then let's say my path, I wanted to adjust the points. I can click on them, adjust the curve. Always go back in and adjust things at any point. If I ever wanted to go back into the width tool, I can always go back to that and make things wider. But for time's sake, let's say that this is kind of where we wanted it, but I want to change the colors up here. So let's get our selection. And I want to select maybe this, 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 this. And I'm going to say path, outline stroke. So it changes these things that we were manipulating into solid paths instead of strokes. So if you kind of look at the object here and you see that there's a bunch of points now, but then there's also no points around the object on this one. versus this one. So these top ones I didn't convert, but I just wanted to show that there is a way to change it into like a solid shape too. Right now it's in a form where it's more you can still manipulate it. But if you were kind of done manipulating it, that's all you wanted to do, you can convert things over into full like paths, which right now, like I said, it's really just a stroke that we're manipulating. So I can always outline the stroke. There may be times where you need to do that. It's a good tool to know about. So let's do the last grand finale here on this logo and change this. Whoops. We want a gradient. And I want a gradient with certain colors. So there are some presets that we could play around with. You could even like adjust each one individually. I guess right now I could even play around with, I guess, the black and white version. Let's see what that can look like too. All right, so yeah, the gradient tool, there's a few different areas you can manipulate it. Right now, for whatever, oh, I see. We were in a grayscale thing. That's why it wasn't allowing me to, I think, a grayscale setting. Sometimes the program has a lot of different options. Like I said before, CMKY, all these different things. I think it just got switched on me and I was like confused on why I couldn't access my colors on the gradient. There it is. For whatever reason, I was kind of locked out there. A few of my tools were shut off, but they just weren't activated. So where now I could give color to this gradient if I wanted to. So maybe on this area here too. And then now this is kind of where you can do the dropper tool. You can copy, I guess, your things that it already sees. So let's do it like this. Let's select this one, and this one. I dropper all of those. And then I'll change this one. So orange or something like that. And then I'll select all of these. And I dropper this. And then maybe everything could have a stroke. So I could add a thin stroke around everything. And then now, last little thing I'm going to show just before we wrap this up, I'm going to put marigold flowers or something right on this. But I'm going to make a new artboard. So artboards allow you to create basically a separate document, if you will. If, like I said, if you know your dimensions of what you're going for, if you're going for a business card, if you're going for a particular size, I would definitely know your sizes before you just make something random so it actually fits when you're printing it. But in this case, for time's sake, I just kind of made something smaller to represent kind of that same idea. And then now we'll use our text tool. And then there's some tools at the top to align things and stuff like that. You obviously can play around with fonts all day long. I have some fonts that are maybe would work perfect for this. Sure. And then usually I like to group things up, and then I can more easily justify things together when they're all in big chunks. So this is a very quick and basic logo, I would say. We still were able to get to a conclusion in a certain respect. Yeah, I was going to do a different one. There actually was a separate graphic that I was going to show you guys, but I guess for time's sake, where we kind of rolled into, it still worked. But yeah, for the last final, I guess, bit of it, just want to show you guys that I do have a website. You guys can check out my work. So behance.net/hightower. This is a website that you could go to and kind of scroll through and see kind of some different things I've used Photoshop for, Illustrator, my hand drawing skills, combination of both. I also have a website that showcases some of my 3D stuff that I do too. So if you by chance stumble upon one of my 3D classes, that'll make more sense there. And also, if you have any questions, you feel free to email me at this email address. Though it's not just for my 3D stuff, it's for my kind of everything. So just shoot me a shout on that if you had any questions about anything else. Also, a good thing to check out is some tutorials on Illustrator. Just straight up YouTube, search Illustrator tutorials. They'll be able to explain probably in depth a little bit deeper for certain tools that I just kind of breezed over, I guess, or I just showcased maybe what they could do, but not all the aspects or features that they had. Yeah, beyond that, I would say let's open it up for some Q&A if anybody has any questions.